My name is Mark Stephen Wade, and I am an avid photographer, and I hope you are too. If you're not, just stay tuned, just keep listening to these videos. Eventually you get there. Just know that even though you're going to hopefully know the technical stuff, becoming an artistic photographer means you're going to have to put in a lot of time and effort. It's not always easy, and you're going to make a lot of mistakes, but the mistakes are what help you learn. And this is the most beautiful part about digital photography. We've come so far that the learning curve for photography has been greatly reduced. In the beginning, it made real photographers kind of angry because they had to work at it so hard. They had to go to school and learn history of photography and learn all these things. And I'm not saying don't learn history. I think that's great. But they had to do all these other things to get to a point where they could master the, making photographs. And it was all with film. And that was a slow process. It was expensive. Nowadays with digital, it's like pick it up. You look at your monitor to see if you're doing it right or not. And it's immediate feedback. It tells you immediately. So the learning curve is very, very short. And I'm trying to help everybody to make it even shorter with these little short videos. Okay, so we've learned about ISO. We've learned about aperture, right? ISO is the sensitivity or the gain of your sensor. Aperture is the lens hole size that you have in order to make that photograph. It's either really small, or it can be medium, or it can be large. And there are different scenarios for all different sizes of apertures, and we have to understand what happens when you close it down. How does that change the look? When we open it wide up, how does that change the look of what I'm making? Because we need to understand how we're making something, right? We have to take responsibility for it. Now, the third leg of this exposure trilogy, if you will, is shutter speed. And all three of these components work together. Now, you're going to figure it out any way you can figure it out. You may end up not doing what I do. Everybody works a little bit differently. And when you start in video, everything changes completely. Well, not completely, but they do change because things are just different with video. That's just the way it happens. Okay, so I've got my little camera here. This is a Nikon Z6. Good little camera. Does good video, decent video, and makes really good photographs. I love this camera. It's not my favorite for a lot of different reasons, but I used to be, let me just put it this way. I used to be a strictly Nikon guy, but when, Sony started stepping things up and Nikon was ignoring the niche of where everything was going, where people were making video and photographs, I kind of said, okay, fine. I went to Sony and I started buying gear. So, okay, that's beside the point. But I've got my Z6 here, and I really love this camera. And how do I set shutter speed? Well, like I say, you're going to do it probably differently than me, or a little bit. Everybody does it a little bit differently. And essentially, say I was outside. You know what? Let's do it right here. Say I'm inside a room like this. It's pretty well lit. It's daylight outside, and there's a couple of lights on in here to just kind of even things out. But if I'm inside, like a house that's well lit, I'm probably going to start at about 1600 ISO, and I'm talking about a well-lit house, okay? I'm not outside in direct sunlight. So I would just turn my camera on, and on this one there's an ISO button right here, and I would just press that. Now yours might vary, right? It might vary. Then I would scroll with this wheel until I find, okay, there's ISO 1600, right? So there I'm at 1600. Well, what do I want to do? What kind of photograph do I want to make? Well, I want to make a photograph where there's a bunch of people in my house and we're having a little party. So obviously I wouldn't use this lens, but I would use a much wider lens. Or maybe I would. Maybe I'm at a wedding and I want to shoot people across the room. Well, I'm at ISO 1600, and then so I kind of want a fairly fast shutter speed, right? Because I don't want it blurry. I need a shutter speed. Well, remember when we talked about aperture? Well, I want a bigger aperture, and what I mean bigger is I want a bigger hole. So I want to get at about, say I want an aperture. I'm at 3.5 right now. That's pretty wide, right? Can I get wider? So this is you have to, on mine, you just scroll this wheel. F4, what's going wrong? Okay, I can get down to 2.8 on this one. So that's cool. That's as low as it'll go. That's a pretty fast aperture. So how do I know I'm ISO 1600, I'm at f2.8, is my exposure right? In other words, after I make my shot, are things going to be too dark? Are they going to be too bright? And that's where that's the issue with not exposing correctly. If you overexpose too much, you'll blow it out. You'll blow something out, and if you need to go into some editing, you won't have information. If it's too dark and black, you won't have information. So you won't be able to recompose it in editing. Now we're going to talk about shooting JPEG after this and why it's important to learn to shoot in JPEG and get things as right as you can in your camera. But for now, we're going to assume that you're going to edit your photographs. So you want to make sure that none of your information is blown out or crushed, and so that you can't even get information out of there for different reasons. You get noise, or you just don't get anything, right? So how do I know if it's right? Well, every camera has a meter right here. Like this one has a meter right here, and I think if I look through the viewfinder, yeah, it's down at the bottom. So I'm looking at that, and what's it telling me? It's telling me if I point over in that corner, and you can't see this very well, that it's very hot because I'm pointing right at a light, and it's just, you can, let's see, let's point it this way. Let's point it up there. You can see that it's too hot. This is the plus side, this is the minus side. That's Nikon. They do things backwards a lot of times. So that's the plus side. So what do? Well, I'm going to have to, I'm at 1/125th of the second, which is fine for indoor stuff. You know, you're pushing the envelope. If people are moving around really fast, you might get a little blurred, especially with the low 2.8. And we're going to talk about focusing and autofocus after this. So, okay, so I don't like that about my Z6. It turns itself off too often. So there, let's point that at the wall. I'm really hot there, and then I just start turning my wheel, and whoops, let's get back to 2.8. Now I'm setting my, see what I'm doing here? Now I'm at 1/250th. I'm at 1/320th. I'm just a little hot. That's telling me 1/400th. That's a good exposure against that wall. Now over there, if I point it over there, it's going to be hot. But right there on that wall, it's pretty good. And you want to set your exposure if you want to shoot people's faces, you want to get the lighting in the room. You want to point it at somebody's face and set your meter. That's your meter. You set your meter to where the face is good. If you blow out something in the background, that's okay. You need to get exposure on the face, correct? Okay, so that is why we set our shutter speed to where we set it. Now, you're going to experiment with this and come up with your own, way of doing things. And that's important to know, that whatever I say is not gospel. In other words, it isn't something that you have to do. You're going to experiment with this, and you're going to come up with your own way of doing things. But just know this, the three things you have to know: ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. They all work together, and and learn to use your meter. Now the thing about meters is sometimes, like with this meter, it reads hot. And what I mean by that is it'll say something is hot. But when I put the meter down to right in the center, it's pretty dark. It's not. It gives you some lateral movement to make it to go hotter. And that's important to understand. It's important to understand your meter and how it works. Okay, that's all I got for here. We're going to get into focusing next. So ISO, aperture, and shutter speed all work together. Now eventually we're going to talk about, some settings, some basic settings, but your camera and you have to learn each other and how each other work. But those are the three basics. But next we're going to talk about focus and when to use autofocus, when to use manual focus, and all that sort of thing. So if you're not an avid photographer, I hope you're going to become one, because photography is so much fun and it gets you out of yourself, gets you out into the world, and so you can just have a lot of fun with it. I love making photographs, and I hope you will too. Thank you for listening.